What's up, guys? Welcome to my Econ 110 Midterm 1 review. Are you ready? So our first chapter is chapter 2. It's called Thinking Like an Economist. It basically just kind of goes over what economics is and kind of how economists think. So economics is the study of choices under scarcity, and that's as in-depth as I'm going to go on that. We have two branches of economics. So the first one is microeconomics. It's anything that works with a specific market. And so you can literally think of any market in the US, in any country. If you're working with one market, that's microeconomics. So a few examples of that are health insurance, fast food, automobiles, any kind of specific market. And then we have macroeconomics, which is anything that works with the overall economy. And so stuff that has to do with unemployment, inflation, GDP and CPI, all of that is part of the branch of macroeconomics. Economists use historical data to test their hypotheses, and the reason for this is because it's kind of hard to go out into the real world and set up an experiment when you're studying something that could be as big as the entire economy. It's hard to go out and set up an experiment. And so instead, we try and find historical data, stuff that has already happened, to test hypotheses. In economics, we try and distinguish between these two types of statements. The first one is a positive statement, and this is something that can be proven. Examples of key words that will tip you off and let you know that it's a positive statement are can, will, is, are, anything that shows that it's something that can be proven. It's descriptive of the world. And then we also have normative statements, which are more judgmental. They're kind of opinions in a way. And so some key words to look for when you're looking for a normative statement is should, better or worse off, too much or too little, more important or less important, anything that kind of shows that it's an opinion and not something that's describing the world. Okay, so another thing we talk about in this chapter is the circular flow diagram. And basically all this is just a diagram that shows the way dollars flow through an economy. And it's a really simplified model, obviously. But we have two different markets in it, and then we have two different people. So we have our households and we have our firms, and their money and their goods and things will flow through the economy, and this just shows how that works. So households will pay money for goods and services that the firms are providing, and that's that outer green arrow on the top, which is the money flowing from the household to the firm because they're paying for a good or service. That's the market for goods and services. And that red arrow on the inside is showing the good or the service that the firm is providing, which is flowing to the household. And then on the bottom, we have our market for factors of production, which basically just shows that all that money that the firm gets from the households, the revenue, it's going to flow back to the households eventually because the firms are going to pay for their factors of production, which are like rent and wages for their labor and other things like that. And then the households provide their capital, which is their labor or other things, and that flows through that red arrow over to the firms. And so this kind of just shows the way the money is flowing through an economy. Then we have chapter 3, which is opportunity costs and gains from trade. The first thing in this chapter is opportunity costs, which is a really important concept to know. And basically, it just shows you if you're doing something right now, it tells you if what you're doing is worth it based on what the next best thing that you could be doing is. And so the way we calculate opportunity cost is we take the explicit cost of our current option, and then we add the benefits minus the costs of our next best option. So we're trying to see, okay, whatever I'm doing, what is the cost of what I'm doing? And also, what am I giving up to be doing what I'm doing right now? Should I be doing this other thing instead? In other words, we can explain this as taking your explicit costs and adding your net implicit costs to it. Then we have PPFs. PPFs just basically show It's a bundle of goods that you can produce that are possible for you to produce given your inputs. And so it's all the possible efficient combination of goods in an economy. And we have two different types of PPFs. The first is a straight PPF, which means that you have interchangeable inputs. And so it could be something like if you make candy bars and truffles and all you have to use for those two goods is chocolate, that chocolate, it's an interchangeable input. You can use it for both candy bars and truffles, and that will cause your PPF to have a straight line. And then you also have curved PPFs, which happens when you have specialized inputs. And so the classic example that we use in economics a lot is guns and butter. I don't know why, but we do. And you could have a bunch of people in your economy all making guns. Like, for example, if there's a war, you're going to have as more people making guns than people making butter. But there's probably some people in your economy that are better at making guns than they are at making butter. And there's probably some people who are better at making butter than making guns. And so if you specialize in one of those things, it's going to cause like not all of your workers to have the same production. And so it'll actually cause your PPF to be curved. Here's an example of a PPF. Here are just some characteristics that you'll need to know. You'll need to know what each of these mean and where on the PPF they go. First, we have efficiency. So if you're on the curve, if you're on this blue line, you're efficient. That means that you're producing you're producing as many goods as you possibly can with the inputs that you're given. So anywhere along this blue line is a point where you have a different bundle of goods that you can produce. And anywhere inside the blue line is not efficient. And that just means that you're not producing as many goods as you could be given your inputs. And then anywhere outside the curve is not feasible. So if you look at point D, that's not possible to produce that many goods, because what the PPF is doing is it's showing us the greatest possible combination of goods we can do. And then we have specialization, which means if you're fully specialized, you're on one of the axes. So you're either producing all of good X or all of good Y. So for example, point E is specialized, but it's not efficient because it's not on the curve. If you were here, you would be specialized and efficient. And yep. So with specialization, we often say that you want to specialize in the thing you have a comparative advantage in. And what that means, well, we find comparative advantage by calculating opportunity cost, which is why it's so important to know how to calculate opportunity cost. And so we kind of differentiate between these two things, which are absolute advantage and comparative advantage. Absolute advantage just means whoever has the absolute advantage is just the faster person at producing that good. And then whoever has the comparative advantage is the person who has the lowest opportunity cost, which actually means that person is giving up less to make that good. So whoever is giving up the least to do whatever they're doing has the comparative advantage. And you always want to specialize in the thing you have the comparative advantage in, because that will actually allow you to make trades with other people and then end up with more than you would have if you were just trying to do everything on your own. So there's a specific type of problem that you'll get with calculating absolute and comparative advantage, and this is a quota problem. And so in these problems, you'll have one good X, that has a quota. So it'll say, you need to produce this much of this good, and then you'll have good Y, which you just want to produce as much as possible of it. And so the way we do this is first, we'll calculate the opportunity cost and determine who has the comparative advantage in which good. And it'll always be that if you have two people and two different goods, each person will have a comparative advantage in one. You can never have a comparative advantage in both things. So once you calculate that, whoever has the comparative advantage for good X will begin producing that good. And then one of two things will happen. So either they'll have enough time to finish the quota. They'll get as much of that good as they needed. And then if that happens, they'll move on and they'll start producing as much of good Y as they can in the time limit that they have. Or they won't be able to finish the quota in the time that they have, and so they'll just make as much of good X as they can, and then the other person will finish producing good X, they'll fill the quota, and then they'll produce as much of good Y as they can. So again, trade, it's really important to know your opportunity cost and know your comparative advantage, because trade is always efficient it's always beneficial at a price between both parties' opportunity costs. So we have a few caveats to specialization. Yes, it's always good to do the thing you have the comparative advantage in, but there are some times when it might also be good to do something else, and these are those times. And so we have utility, which is if you enjoy doing something, then the opportunity cost is lower. And so, for example, if I like to make cookies, but I'm really bad at it, I might still make cookies sometimes because the fact that I enjoy it lowers my opportunity cost. And then we have productivity, which just means that opportunity cost rises the more you do of something. And so even if, like for me, even if studying for one of my classes might be a really smart thing to do, I might not study for 12 hours straight because each hour that I study, my productivity goes down, and by the time I get to that 12th hour, it's not benefiting me at all. And so sometimes it's good to stop before your opportunity cost gets too high. And then security just means that your comparative advantage might change in the future, and it might be that whatever you're doing now, you actually might not be good at it in the future. And so sometimes you want to do something else at the same time so that you have kind of that backup plan. Okay, then we have chapter 4, which talks all about supply and demand, the best thing about economics in my opinion. And so we have the law of demand. This is a demand curve. It kind of just shows people's willingness to pay for a good. And so the law of demand states that as price increases, the quantity demanded, the amount that people want of that good, decreases. And so as you can see here, when the price is really low, lots of people want the good. And then as the price increases, less and less people want the good. And so it's showing their willingness to pay for that good. We differentiate between a change in quantity demanded and a change in demand. The only thing that will change quantity demanded is price, but you can shift the whole curve if something changes in the market. I made up this little acronym to help you remember these different things that will shift the demand curve. And the acronym is TIPPIN because the demand curve is sloped downward, and so it's easy to remember. So when we have changes in taste and preferences, so maybe all of a sudden, like everybody thinks that it's really good for you to eat steak every day. Maybe it is, I don't know. And so everybody starts wanting to buy steak, and the demand curve for steak shifts out. Other things that can shift the curve are income, the price of relative goods. So we have complements and substitutes, and those are actually really important to know. So complements are goods that you buy together, and so it could be like peanut butter and jelly. If the price of jelly goes down, more people might actually buy peanut butter because they buy those two goods together. And then we also have substitutes, which are goods that you can like exchange for each other. For example, maybe you need a flashlight, but flashlights are really expensive. You might buy a headlamp instead, and those would be substitutes for each other. Expectations of price. So if you are looking to buy a good and you think that the price is going to increase in the future, your demand for that good might be higher now. You might want to buy it now. And so the demand curve might shift to the right. And then we also have number of buyers. If more people enter the market, the demand curve will shift right. And then we have the law of supply, and it's basically the exact same thing as the law of demand. It just is flipped. So it states that as price increases, quantity supplied increases. And so it's just showing sellers' willingness to sell. They're more willing to sell if the price is higher, because obviously if the price is higher, they get more profits. That's good for them. Again, we differentiate between a change in quantity to supplied and a change in supply. And so things that will shift the supply curve Again, I made up this little acronym. It's ITEN. It's kind of like item, but not an M, it's an N. It's really good. It's really helpful to remember. And so when you have changes in input prices, so that's basically just prices of like things that are going into the good the supplier is providing. If those prices change, then supply will shift. Also technology, expectations of price, same thing. If sellers believe that the price is going to increase in the future, their supply might actually decrease today so that they can sell more in the future when the price is higher, because obviously they want to sell when there's a higher price. And then number of buyers, or that should say sellers, number of sellers. If more sellers enter the market, then the supply curve will shift right. So again, this is really important to remember, super important. Quantity demanded, quantity supplied are not the same thing as demand and supply. When quantity demanded or quantity supplied changes, you're moving along the curve. If demand shifts or supply shifts, it's the whole curve moving, and that's super important to remember. A shortage is actually just, it's really simple. It's when the quantity demanded, which would be point B on that diagram, exceeds quantity supplied, which is point A. And this happens when something drives the price down, which could be something like a price ceiling. And when the price is lower, more people want to buy it, but less people want to sell it. And so there's a shortage of that good because there's too many people who want it. And then we have a surplus, which is the exact opposite of that. And so it's basically just when there's more people who are willing to sell the good than there are who are willing to buy it. And that happens when something drives the price up. And so we have sellers that are willing to sell and willing to produce the good, but not enough people want to buy it, and so there's too much of that good in the market that's not getting sold to consumers. And then we have the last chapter, which is my favorite chapter, elasticity. It's really fun. So first we have the midpoint formula, which looks super scary, but it's not actually that scary. Basically what this does is it helps you calculate elasticity. And so you always put quantity on top and price or income on the bottom. And the way I remember this is queens over princesses. And, and basically all this does is it's finding like an average for you. And so you'll take, what will happen is you'll have a good and the price of that good will change and the quantity will change. And so what you'll do is you'll take both the quantities and subtract them, and then you'll find the average between them, and then both the prices, subtract them, find the average between them, and when you divide those, that gives you your elasticity. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means, but we have 4 different kinds of elasticity. We have demand elasticity, income elasticity, cross price, and supply, and all 4 of those are really important to know. So elasticity of demand is how much quantity demanded changes in response to a change in price. This just means that as the price of a good changes, if the price goes up, how many less people buy the good? If the price goes down, how many more people buy the good? The elasticity is showing you the relationship between those 2 things. And so perfectly elastic demand, that's this horizontal curve right here. That's what demand looks like when it's perfectly elastic. And what that means is that if the price goes up at all, everyone will stop buying the good. So demand is infinitely responsive to a change in price, and that's why your elasticity is infinity when it's perfectly elastic. And then we also have perfectly inelastic demand, which, as you can probably guess, is the exact opposite of that. And so that's this vertical curve right here, and that just means that if the price changes at all, the demand will not change. The quantity demanded will not change. The same amount of people will still buy the good, even if the price goes way up or way down, doesn't matter. And I think about that, usually those kinds of goods are like necessities, so it could be like toilet paper or something. Probably people are still gonna buy toilet paper even if it's really expensive. And then we also have unit elastic, which is when elasticity is 1, and that's this curve right here. And usually that's a straight curve in this class, but yeah. There are a few things that make demand more elastic for a good. I would memorize these, they're really important. The first one is when close substitutes are available. So if you're willing to substitute away from the good that you're thinking about buying for another good, your demand for that good is pretty elastic, because if the price of that good goes up, you'll probably just substitute away to another good. And then also, if the good is a luxury, your demand is probably more elastic. I think about like a yacht. Yachts are a crazy luxury good. Someone who's looking into buying a yacht, if the yacht gets way more expensive, they'll probably just not buy the yacht because they don't really need it. It's just something that's fun to have. And then if the market is narrowly defined, and I think about this like if you're buying a car, if you're looking at a Toyota Camry specifically, then your demand for the Toyota Camry is probably more elastic than your demand for a car in general. Because you know you want to buy a car, but it doesn't have to be a Toyota Camry. You might substitute away. If it's measured over a long period of time, it gives you more time, again, to change your preferences or move to another good. So it'll be more elastic. And then the last one is, this is kind of like being a luxury good, but if it makes up a large fraction of your income, you're probably going to be more elastic. And then we have elasticity of supply, which again, it's just basically the same exact thing. It's how much quantity supplied changes in response to a price. Same thing. And so again, when supply is perfectly elastic, it's horizontal. If the price goes down by a little bit, everyone will stop supplying the good. Obviously that's like not super realistic, and then if it's perfectly inelastic, it's straight up and down. If the price changes at all, quantity supplied will not change. And then unit elastic. So what makes supply more elastic? Again, these are very important. So if the inputs for the good you're supplying can be used in many different goods, your elasticity of supply is probably more elastic. You're probably more willing to stop supplying that good and supply another good instead. If it's measured over a long period of time, same thing with demand. And then if the market is narrowly defined, also the same, which makes those really easy to remember. We have 4 different kinds of elasticities. We just talked about demand elasticity and supply elasticity, but we also have 2 others. We have income elasticity, which, as you can probably guess, is how quantity demanded changes with a response to a change in income. And then we have cross-price elasticity, which is when the price of one good changes, how does the price of the quantity demanded of another good change? And that's what we look at when we're looking at complements and substitutes, which I talked about earlier. And so here's our 4 magical number lines to help you remember all of these elasticities. Demand elasticity is always negative unless it's a Giffen good, and Giffen goods are super rare. There's like maybe one of them in the world, maybe. And basically it's just when if the price of a good goes up, the quantity demanded goes up as well. So obviously, yeah, that's really rare. Usually if the price of a good goes up, you won't want it anymore. If you're inelastic, you're between 0 and -1, and if you're elastic, you're less than -1. As you can see, for all of these, inelastic is between -1 and 1. So the closer you are to 0, the more inelastic you are. The further away from 0, the more elastic you are. So the closer you get to infinity, either negative infinity or positive infinity, it doesn't matter, that's more elastic. For our income elasticity, we know that if it's less than 0, it's an inferior good. What an inferior good is as your income goes up, your demand for that good goes down. And so for a lot of people, this is like top ramen. It's probably not for me. I love top ramen. But a lot of people, as their income goes up, their demand for top ramen goes down because they're buying nicer food, right? A normal good is positive. That's just a good that as your income goes up, you buy more of it. And then necessity is anything less than 1. And then if your elasticity is greater than 1 for income elasticity, it's a luxury good. Cross-price elasticity, if it's negative, it's a complement. It's a good you buy together. And then if it's positive, it's a substitute. It's goods that you can substitute for each other. And then supply elasticity is always positive, and I don't think it's ever negative, ever. And that is the end. Thank you so much for watching.